Hello and most welcome to 1568. I will today try out with a new microphone here. See how that works. This will be a sort of summary from what we went through in 1567, where we continue to take up the criticism offered by Wittgenstein regarding Köhler and later also of G.E. Moore. And when it comes to the example of Wolfgang Köhler, the founder of the Gestalt psychology, one could say that here is obviously a case of progress, where we leave the old idea of the sense mosaic, where everything is just atoms of sensory potentialities that we use and transform through a sort of analysis. This is also referred to the kaleidoscopic theory. And by the time Köhler came, that way of seeing things was the most prevalent one. Instead, Köhler introduces the idea of the Gestalt, or what we will also refer to as the visual object. And what happens is a process of reification of the visual object begins, so that it becomes a thing in itself without really participating in a normal context. And as you can imagine, Wittgenstein is not overly enthusiastic about non-connected concepts, words, categories. It should have a place somewhere, should have a reason, and of course it should definitely have some sort of use. Not be hanging freely in mid-air, so to speak. It's a variety of the well-established misunderstanding of how things works. The idea that things not really need to participate, be active, having a purpose or a proper place of a sort. They are like pawns in a chess game that gone to the other side and can turn into whatever the player chooses them to turn into. This is not a positive development according to Wittgenstein, because instead of clarification it leads to more mud being thrown into the clear water. So we will understand less than we did from the start. The concept of the visual object is not really helpful or advantageous. It doesn't have a purpose. Two things can be said about that. The first, more obvious one, is a copycat procedure. Copycat from science, the idea of an object in itself without qualities, like an atom, molecule, completely interchangeable. The second is object in the language game do exist, but they are exceedingly rare, very uncommon. The risk of finding them is even slight. You see a chair, you see a plant, a bird, or you probably don't even see a bird, you see a blackbird or a sparrow, for instance. So one could say for the that the first step into the confusion is to start using the concept object a bit too generous and frivolous. It's a bit sloppy way of using words. It's like using a cricket bat to shoot at billiard balls instead of a cue. It doesn't fit and it doesn't really work, but in some superficial way it can at least not become too awkward. And this is, of course, similar what we went through, and I think it could be a good idea to compare with Wittgenstein Rethinking the Inner, Paul Johnston's marvelous book, and the nice structure of the chapters are referring exactly to the different problems, so to speak, that Wittgenstein had when it comes to the psychic phenomenons. And the first one, the first chapter, starts elegantly, the problem of the inner. And when we speak of our thinking, we confuse that talk with the thinking itself. How we represent thinking has a completely different grammatical place compared to thinking itself. And I think that is one of the most devastating misconceptions. It's crippling for one's thinking. Makes thinking less functionable. You become forced to, or you simply don't understand it. And we have calculating in the head and calculating on paper. I think that is especially pertinent when we think of similar discussions we had. We spoke many episodes ago of Brouwer's intuitionist mathematics or constructive mathematics, and starting to think that calculation is something of an inner act, will lead to Platonic realism, which I would say is a defect on thinking. And it doesn't make any sense from a wide array of perspectives. The first is definitely you did not learn how to calculate from within, neither in a historic viewpoint, the humans learned once upon a time how to count, or how you, when growing up, learned how to count. In neither of these alternatives is there an inner process going on. Stone Age man most probably handed their equivalent of marbles, pebbles, something similar. They added them into piles and they compared it maybe to their sheep or something. And so counting started. You can also use your fingers, but it's always in connection with something you do, always with a purpose there. And this took millennia to change, actually. Not even the Renaissance or the Industrial Revolution managed to screw up that, excuse me for the term, that understanding. And still, at the late 19th century, the majority of mathematicians were practical and earth-grounded. They did not believe that counting was inner or unreal or anything like transcendental or having the feature of beyondness. That later developed, and by the turn of the century the ideas had definitely changed, both, I would say, in mathematics and also the development that already started in philosophy now became even stronger. And when Bertrand Russell, Whitehead, and others sort of approached mathematics, it was already transcendental, having the capacity of being beyond. And they start thinking set theory would explain where mathematics is coming from an even more abstract thing. I think they ended up with the set of zero or nothing. That became zero. So it lost its connection to the world entirely. And people went out on a limb. I think I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, but Gödel, encouraged by Hilbert, tried to make the whole mathematical into a system or sort of one thing, which is in itself rather ridiculous. Mathematics is widely different. Cannot talk about the mathematics or a mathematics. But he ended with a paradox that ended his career and life, I'd say, and put him into an anorectic state where he stopped eating. Hilbert was also badly affected, and many others, mathematicians. I think this goes to show how strong these tendencies are, or misunderstandings, and how changes in society or the knowledge makes these tendencies even stronger. It sort of escalated in the beginning of the 19th century drastically. And oddly enough, this was exactly when quantum mechanics came, almost exactly. And of course it was ignored by Bertrand Russells and the likes. It could not even be bad to be looked at. Reading Wittgenstein, this mystery, why quantum mechanics never took hold of thinking, knowledge, education, philosophy, is not that hard to understand. The misunderstandings were already established in everyday language by then. Firmly established and impossible to get around without the cure of philosophical investigations and more. instead of changing mathematics, grew even more Platonic, and I would say today 99 or 98% of all mathematicians are Platonic. And physics also grew, oddly enough, despite the quantum revolution, more and more transcendental and otherworldly. I think that is taken to the fullest by actually half compatriot to me, Max Tegmark, who both used a Platonic version of numbers and a transcendental physics to construct the many worlds theory, or elaborate the already established Eueverichian many worlds theory. None of this is without connection to Wittgenstein, I'd say. It would be impossible without the misunderstanding of the inner. Another example given in this Wittgenstein rethinking the inner is clock, the clock. Learning how the clock works, telling time. Of course, Wittgenstein might say, telling the time works as all other grammatical words in the Sprachspiel language game. It's something that develops for a purpose on the outside. All its uses, all its goals, telos, aita, whatever you prefer to call them, are on the outside. None is on the inside. And then you learn this. You could call it a skill, an ability. And once learned, it becomes automatic, and so automatic that people start thinking that it must be some sort of biological clock, an internal clock. Somewhere they usually opt for the brain. That's the most popular guess, that it should be in the brain somewhere. Or even worse, a sort of Max Tegmarkian or Everetian idea, and not even thinking how we know the clock, just say that there's a clock out there and we understand time as looking at the clock. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Or at the clock is somewhere outside of us, which is Well, the outside of certain absolute things is often the mirror image of the private innerness. Telling colors, I would say, is also one of those things. So interesting, so it's well worth mentioning again. The basic color needs some sort of ostensive definition, no doubt, but it will not be enough. There is no chance of an Augustinian reduction of everything just to a pointing of a finger. No, it needs to be followed with words, gestures, and of course context, purpose, use, and so forth. And then slowly, it will take time, the color will be learnt. And once learnt, it becomes so automatic, so we assume that colors are something of the inner, something that is produced in the retina or those papilles, I think they call inside the eyes. Yes, they do detect different colors, and there is a reversed image on the retina to be even possible to photograph, but it doesn't mean that colors are inside the head. That will end directly with a homunculus. And nobody wants to go into the lair of the homunculus. It's not a nice place to stay in. I remember myself, orange was a pretty new color when I grew up still. And I think some people still called it fiery gold or fiery yellow, something like that. I like that term, it sounded nice. Some older people could not differentiate it. Took me some time, and I still today have this feel of an interconnectedness with the word, this fiery yellow, which I still like today. I can't use it, it's become out of fashion. That is a very nice expression. Later I also had to learn, as many others, sort of violet pink color called cerise. Took some time to recognize it, and now my color categories has developed This is of course also in connection that there's loads more colors going around today. But the word is important. Without the word, it doesn't really make sense to see how we learn it, how we get used to it, and there's a close connection between the word and the color. They come together simultaneously and cannot easily be separated out. We also mention, I think, how the Greeks only had one color for bronze, the sky, and skin and hair. It's the same color, and it also jumps, what would say, the color prism. Didn't follow that neatly. It's also a sort of a misnomer that it should be a part of the color prism. Not always. There's one chapter that would handle especially the fiery yellow, and that's the musicality of the words. How words have an absolutely specific ring to them. And the aspect blind is not aware of this. He would not notice differences of words, not even know what that would be referring to. And as we learned recently from especially the latest book, Experience and Expression by Joachim Schulte, that there are aspect blind people in the world, and obviously they would be Platonic as well. Everything would be more, say this scale here, more abstractable and more so to speak universalizable. So for them there could be, they misuse the language and say there are objects out there, and even though that wouldn't work in language, that would be clumsy. And this is very similar to someone who can't ride his horse, probably cannot really differentiate between trotting or galloping or anything like that. Or somebody who's not good at fixing his car, it will lead to malfunctioning. Wittgenstein is not talking about an idealist way of using the language. He's always talking about how we actually use language. This is the maybe most different point between Wittgenstein and other philosophers. He's mighty different in this. I might put the book down. Yeah, the mystery of thought. Yeah, I also like this with consciousness. Consciousness in modern day has become an object, so to speak, that doesn't have a purpose and has only innerness. And this, I wonder why no one has brought this up. Maybe someone should bring it to Arizona, where I think it's coming up now soon, August to September. There is a worldwide conference for consciousness, participating all famous names like Chalmers and Couples Churchland, Sir Roger Penrose, Hammeroff, many, many others. And to discuss consciousness in itself, something apart from any purpose like senses, perception, feelings, emotions, concepts, words, acts. On top of that, or transcendental from that, we have consciousness in itself as an object. And that conclusion, my take on that is that in the context of the technical, machine-like thinking, the question is asked, what is consciousness in itself? And then the problem starts. Consciousness that doesn't participate is very similar, I would say, to the visual object of Wolfgang Köhler or the sensibles of G.E. Moore. Sense data in itself. In re. In a way, consciousness is all we do. Or consciousness. Of course, from the beginning, its use is rather new, maybe in connection with anesthesia to see if someone is conscious or not, or it might be erupting from medicine. And as we, especially in the beginning of the last century, took everything from the machine technological way of thinking, the machine-like way of Bernard and Francois Jacob and Jacques Monod and others we've been discussing now for some time in the other lectures where I do conferences with Kalle Lundblad. They would like to see that metaphor is not as good as concept, and concept has more of this not participating in an actual situation. So it might be that they got what actually is valuable in reverse. Just a guess. I don't want to be smug about it. Here is a rather nice explanation, speaking of wetness or rain, page 61. We do not move, this is like 7 lines down, we do not move from the concept appearance of rain to the concept rain. Rather, we start with the occurrence, and from there we move to the idea of appearances, of sensations. First, we teach someone to say, it is raining, then she learns, it seems to be raining. We learn to talk about wetness in connection with water, and it is a late and paradoxical use of the concept if the individual one day says, I have a sensation of wetness despite being completely dry. Thus our senses do not teach us that there are objects. Rather we speak of material objects, characterizes the concept sensations. And I say that is not a little important, and these many examples from Wittgenstein, Schulte and Johnston are necessary. Cannot jump to these understandings directly. It's like you're playing Monopoly and you get a card, go directly to go, or worse, to prison. You need to do the rounds. Whereas the machine technical model is like you can learn the concept without using it by definition, or entering into the transcendental skies of pure beyondness, and there, somewhere in there, grasp it and take it down so you can then later use it. And as you might know by now, this is not what Wittgenstein is pointing to. I read this one before. It's from Remarks on the Philosophy of Psychology. If someone says to me, N has written it to me, I can ask him, which N do you mean? And must he refer to an experience in speaking the name if he is to answer me? And if he now simply pronounces the name N, perhaps as an introduction to a statement of N, can't I equally well ask him, whom do you mean? And he equally well answer. And this points to that it's implausible that we always have a special experience that it begins with an innerness. The guy might just say N and it ends with that. And there is never ever an explanation who N was or were, or maybe it was just an N, as he said. So it's interesting to see how Köhler was such a great impetus to her, to Wittgenstein. I couldn't help thinking that this is similar to how the Ionian physikos provided the impetus for Heraclitus to, so to speak, do his clarification. And although we have only fragments of Heraclitus, what Wittgenstein left is quite extensive. Quite a lot actually is still not published to this day. But of course it needs being put together and all that, but this is extremely helpful. And we can see how in the early 20th century Köhler and more helped Wittgenstein develop his theory. They pushed him even further away from the earlier Tractatus vision, I'd say. There's also an interesting incident mentioned in the foreword to Philosophical Investigations, that a gesture of the Italian economist Piero Sraffa was particularly important for the understanding that, so to say, words in themselves is not enough. And supposedly the old representational way came out from Wittgenstein's mouth, that for every concept there is an equality in the world. And Sraffa asked, what is the representation for this? Napolitanian gesture, apparently. But you can see where it led after that. How it more and more got into the direction of seeing it, where seeing words, concepts, where they actually do their thing, where they participate, and where they were originally born. And he doesn't do a etymological excavation as Heidegger did, looking for the original meanings in ancient Greek, but he pointed to the use in a delicate, indirect manner. An indirect manner which is in itself very hard for us. I mentioned in early, it's like we are playing pool with a cricket bat or a sledgehammer. The delicacy is very important to carefully trod and not be blunt. A very delicate handling of the language that I'd say been sadly misused. Doesn't mean that language can get harmed or deficient, as some people think. But it's been misused, treated bad, like cattle left without air or fresh air and no hay. And this, of course, has made us cruder and less susceptible to, for instance, as mentioned in Johnston's book, the musicality of language. And also musicality in other ways, like tonality and intonation, movements in the face, the actual situation where it takes place, where it all happens. So utterly important for the understanding of language. Precision, so to speak. Well, the lightning speed of thought, an idea that Wittgenstein inherited from William James, is also an important clue to understand that thinking could not really be words, nor could it be images or anything like that. And in a flash of insight, there could be a billion images, and there could be a billion words. And this is how we later develop the thoughts, but it's a completely different process. And there is no connection between the thought and what later develops. It's not to be seen as a seed that has all the the potentialities. It just needs proper watering and good soil to grow into that. That was absolutely determined from the beginning. No, not at all. And I think that is something that is also this machine technological way of thinking, that there is some machine-like cause for everything. All the things we have around us today do have a cause, like this microphone, handheld microphone, was built by someone, and somewhere it happens to start thinking that human beings were the same way. They said something, there is an inside purpose, or there is a clock inside because we tell the time, and therefore there must be a thing ticking inside. Is that banal? Yeah, really, is that banal? But when it comes to this connectivity, there must be a reason, and we ask these questions. I think image does causes more trouble than words, because this all is coming from an image of, let's say, a clock. You investigate it and you find out its meaning. To tock and tick and turn the hours, minutes, and so forth. That is a persistent picture, and images have an extremely priming force that words almost cannot beat. And I would say they have a bigger force than words. Our misunderstanding, I think, starts with a particular image that leads us wrong. But I think that would be for another lecture. Let's now see how the sound became with this microphone. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon or evening, night. Bye.